Good morning. This is Sherry Vernelson. I want to thank you for being here with us this morning for the VI Policy Spotlight. I'm the section chief for the Sensory Support and Assistive Technology section here in the Exceptional Children Division. And today we have with us Carol Ann Hudgens, our section chief for Policy Monitoring and Audit, as well as our two education consultants for vision impairment, Amy Campbell, who serves regions 1 through 4, and Crystal Patrick, who serves regions 5 through 8. Today, as our focus, as you know, is on the VI policy changes that have taken place. And just so that you know, we are already in preparations for some additional technical assistance opportunities in the near future regarding more in-depth discussions around some of the topics here today. So if you don't get all of your questions answered here today, we hope to do that for you in the near future. So now I'm going to turn it over to Carol Ann Hudgens.
Good morning. I would like to share with you the changes to the North Carolina policies governing services for students with disabilities. In May of 2017, the Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP, issued a letter to all state directors of special education regarding the eligibility criteria for children suspected of a visual impairment, including blindness. The OSEP letter was included in the materials emailed on the division listserv announcing this webinar. While states are permitted to establish standards for eligibility for special education and related services and are not required to use the precise definition of a disability term in the IDEA, the state-established standards must not narrow the definitions in the IDEA. As a result of this OSEP memo, the Exceptional Children Division was required to review our policies. Upon review, the North Carolina policies, specifically the definition of visual impairment and the required screenings and evaluations for visual impairment, required revision. Therefore, a request was submitted to the State Board of Education to amend the North Carolina policies to align with the IDEA federal regulations. The North Carolina policies at the top of the slide reflects the definition of visual impairment, including blindness, as it existed prior to the amendment. The sentence that has been crossed out is the information that has been removed as a result of the technical correction approved by the State Board of Education. The remaining definition of visual impairment is still current and now aligns with the federal definition of visual impairment, including blindness, which is included at the bottom of this slide. The required screening and evaluations for visual impairment include hearing screening, summary of conferences with parents or documentation of attempts to conference with parents, social developmental history, education evaluation, ophthalmological or optometric evaluation, and observations across settings. These requirements remain the same. Therefore, they are consistent with the required screening and evaluations before the policy change and after the policy change. What has changed is the requirement to use acuity ranges to establish eligibility. These criteria narrow the definition of the IDEA. Therefore, these criteria have been removed from the North Carolina policies. As you can see in this excerpt from the OSEP letter, states may not use a modifier to determine the significance or severity of a visual impairment, but must consider any impairment in vision, provided that that impairment, even with correction, adversely affects the child's performance and requires special education and related services.
Question 1. Do we still need eye reports? Yes, an ophthalmological or optometric evaluation is still needed when determining eligibility.
Question 2. What is the effective date for the technical correction for visual impairment eligibility? The State Board of Education approved the technical correction to the visual impairment policy in November of 2017, and the correction took effect immediately.
Question 3. Will the policies be changed to remove the requirement that vision in the better eye after correction be between 20/70 and 20/200? It seems at odds with this guidance in this document. The North Carolina policy for visual impairment, including blindness, no longer reflects an acuity range as a determinant factor for eligibility. This correction was made in order to comply with the regulatory requirements to ensure eligibility determinations are not narrowed beyond the scope of IDEA.
Question 4. Am I correct in thinking the functional vision assessment and learning media assessment to be the justification for placement and non-placement? IDEA requires multiple sources of data to be used when an IEP team makes an eligibility determination. A functional vision assessment and learning media assessment are part of the evaluations for school-aged children, and results of these should be considered along with all of the other required screenings and evaluations.
Question 5. So you have a child who has convergence insufficiency, or SO and exotropia, that is affecting his or her reading and writing. They definitely do impact the educational process, but how do you decide 504 or IEP? And then, as a VI teacher, just what is my responsibility? Using multiple sources of data, the IEP team determines whether the disability has an adverse effect on educational performance and requires specially designed instruction. If a student is not found eligible for special education and related services, school personnel could consider whether determining eligibility under Section 504 is warranted.
Question 6. What about the caseload of an itinerant VI? I would have an additional dozen or so students on a caseload that is already over 30 students. If there is an increase in the identification of students with visual impairment, the LEA will have to staff appropriately to meet unique needs determined by the IEP team.
Question 7. Please explain what this change means for VI referral process. What would a good referral look like? How do we tease out other disabilities besides VI? How do we explain VI to teachers? If there is a suspicion of a disability or multiple disabilities, a student must be referred for special education. Remember, to be determined eligible as visually impaired, the student must have a visual impairment. The visual impairment is the direct cause or adverse effect to the educational performance, and special education and related services are needed to address the unique needs associated with the visual impairment. It is imperative that a teacher of the visually impaired be a member of the team to assist other team members in understanding the student's visual challenges and how it impacts the access to the educational and functional environment and making progress in the general curriculum.
Question 8. Should we now be looking towards interventions in the classroom to ensure the deficit is due to vision and not lack of differentiation within the classroom? Yes, a student's response to instruction or intervention should be discussed. How a student responds to interventions within the classroom is data that should inform the IEP team decision when determining eligibility, particularly when determining adverse effect, ruling out lack of instruction in reading and math and English as a second language.
Question 9. Does a child with a visual acuity of 20/40 or 20/60 or intractable diplopia, but a visual acuity of 20/30 in each eye individually, and a FVA LMA that documents that vision issues impact educational functioning and/or access qualify for VI eligibility? If not VI, then what? An FVA and LMA are evaluations that are a part of a multiple source of data that IEP teams use to determine eligibility. These two evaluations should never stand alone when determining eligibility for a student.
Question 10. Does a child who does not have an ocular visual impairment diagnosis, but rather has cortical vision impairment along with normal visual acuity qualify as a student with visual impairment eligibility? A student diagnosed with cortical visual impairment and has normal acuities can be referred for special education if a disability is suspected. A medical diagnosis alone does not establish eligibility or services. The IEP team must review multiple sources of data to determine whether or not to proceed with further evaluations to determine eligibility and the need for specially designed instruction.
Question 11. Who has to document cortical vision impairment? It seems that often ophthalmologists frequently do not write this as a diagnosis. Based on the work of Dr. Roman Lansky, a TVI, OT, or SLP could document the presence of cortical visual impairment. The diagnosis of CVI should come from a medical professional.
Question 12. Which professionals should be serving a child with dyslexia or ocular motor apraxia? Both diagnoses impact visual functioning. A learning disability teacher, a teacher of the visually impaired, an occupational therapist, or is there some kind of guideline for how these professionals should be working together? The IEP team should be composed of individuals with the appropriate expertise, should determine the specially designed instruction and who should deliver it.
Question 13. Does this mean that we can now see students that are having vision-related problems that are blind in one eye and say 20/50 in the other? Yes, if the IEP team determines through multiple sources of data that the vision impairment has an adverse effect on educational performance and requires specially designed instruction.
Question 14. How many times do we have to get an eye report for a student with a permanent eye condition? An ophthalmological or optometric eye report is required evaluation during the eligibility process. An IEP team may determine that an updated eye report is needed when a student is not making progress or if the student's eye condition necessitates it. Anytime an eye report is determined necessary by the IEP team after the initial placement, a re-evaluation would be required.
Question 15. The statement was removed as a result of a diagnosed ocular or cortical pathology. It is understood that regards to the change in acuity qualifications. However, there is great concern for the amount of evaluations that will increase for students with vision therapy. Also understood that it needs to be looked at for specialized instruction. But several have shared that we, as VI professionals, will become the, quote, bad guys or put in difficult situations with the vision therapy students and their families. It is going to be looked at with learning disabilities, and guidance provided, excuse me. Is this going to be looked at with learning disabilities and guidance provided? Historically, we have had that conversation with teams, and it was not well received. Any student suspected of a disability can be referred. The IEP team will decide if an evaluation is necessary. If an evaluation is conducted, eligibility must be based on multiple sources of data, verify that the child is a child with a disability, and that the disability has an adverse effect and requires special education and related services.
Question 16. What guidance and support from the state with vision therapy and CVI are going to be given? Both are on the front burners for many. At this time, the Exceptional Children Division is providing guidance on a case-by-case basis. If there are particular recommendations about what resources are needed, please forward them to the education consultants for vision impairment.
Question 17. How does this impact vision therapy referrals? If a disability is suspected, then a student must be referred for special education. The IEP team will review multiple sources of data, including data regarding vision therapy, and determine if further evaluation is needed to determine if the student is eligible to receive special education and related services.
Question 18. Will students with CVI qualify as legally blind? Eligibility determinations, other purposes such as the Legally Blind Registry for the American Printing House for the Blind. A student with CVI may meet the definition according to the criteria, quote, functioning as legally blind.
Question 19. Can the CVI range be used to identify students with cortical visual impairment as opposed to a functional vision and/or learning media assessment? Answer, no. The CVI range is not a standalone assessment when determining eligibility. However, it can be a relevant source of information in conjunction with the functional vision assessment and learning media assessment when considering the student's unique needs.
Question 20. Has North Carolina revised its criteria within the definition of visual impairment, including blindness? Yes. The State Board of Education approved a technical correction to the North Carolina policy on visual impairment in order to reflect IDEA and not narrow the scope of eligibility for this category.
Question 21. In my experience, students diagnosed with convergent insufficiency are often provided with accommodations to support them while they are undergoing prescribed vision therapy. Do we now consider specially designed instruction by TVI in addition to the vision therapy? Only an IEP team can determine if a visual impairment has an adverse effect on educational performance and requires specially designed instruction.
Technical assistance tips. For the visual impairment worksheet, an amended worksheet will be posted on the EC website for use between now and the implementation of ECATS. For CCAS users, you will fill in the visual acuity as NA inside of the electronic system in order to close and verify the VI worksheet. In developing the worksheet for VI inside of ECATS, the policy change has already occurred. Reminders, eligibility decisions are based on multiple sources of data. When considering the need for special education and related services, the need must be directly related to the visual impairment. If there is no direct relationship to the visual impairment, the child is not eligible as visually impaired, and it may be necessary to suspect a different disability.
Thank you so much for sending us all of your questions during the period that we had open for questions. And we hope that they were answered today, but we are collecting some additional questions that are coming in through the questions box, and we will be answering those, and we'll post answers along with this recorded webinar within the next week or so to the EC Division website, as well as the Visual Impairment Wiki. As you can, if you have other questions, can also be forwarded by email to your education consultants for vision impairment. Again, Amy Campbell for regions 1 through 4, and Crystal Patrick for regions 1 through 5. And that concludes the webinar. Hopefully it's a bonus that you get out a little bit early today. But we appreciate you being here, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.